You hear about it all the time anymore on social media and from the mental health gurus and influencers and talking heads. Boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. But in my experience, it doesn't seem like any quality information is getting out to people on what exactly boundaries are and what they mean. And as in most things, we can dive into our distant past to see what timeless stories actually tell us about boundaries. You might be surprised, it's quite a bit. But why would that be? Well, it's because boundary issues have been going on since time immemorial. As long as there's been humans, there's been problems with boundaries. So, what are personal boundaries really about then? Well, unfortunately, I see way too many people out there who either have absolutely no clue what interpersonal boundaries are and how to deal with them, or they've heard media pundits psychobabbling about boundaries and then suddenly think they know what interpersonal boundaries are all about. And the thing is, it's actually a really complex issue, and it's made 10 times worse by our ultra fast changing and hyper individualistic society. So here it is. Interpersonal boundaries are really about unspoken rules of cooperation. When people work together, as humans have done since there's been humans, there's always been usually unspoken rules about what is and what is not asking too much of someone else. Constantly and everywhere, people are going to be asking too much of other people, and interpersonal boundaries are socially constructed norms that emerge as a way to mitigate this problem. Without any boundaries, people will impose on each other with their boundless needs and expectations, and other people will make themselves miserable bending over backwards to try to meet those demands. So let me give you an example. Let's say a neighbor offers to help you with your new puppy when you're at work. Well, how nice. Well, now you can go to work and not worry about your puppy, that maybe your puppy won't get into mischief or miss out on their medications or whatever. But then let's say that your neighbor asks to come over and visit the puppy on an off day because, well, she just loves the dog so much, especially after looking after him all the time. But you say, no, no, you can't come over. I'm exercising my personal boundaries. Well, guess what? This is full on boundary bullshit. You are misusing the term, and you're basically flinging psychobabble at your neighbor and not actually discussing interpersonal boundaries. What you're missing is a thought towards your neighbor's time and effort and kindness in offering to do something for you. And you just thinking, well, that's just so great. They're so nice to help me without asking for anything in return, without any consideration for your neighbor. Now you might say, well, but Dr. G, they didn't ask for anything in return, right? So that therefore that's an excuse for you to not give a rat's ass about their needs. No. The real boundary violation in this situation, my good friend, is you. And that is because you're just assuming someone's cooperation with you is without any complexity or reciprocal care. Are they making counter demands on you? No, of course not. But it is an unspoken agreement that you will actually consider their feelings. See what I'm saying? And there's a difference there. So now, does that mean that I'm saying you should just let them visit the puppy anytime they want? Of course, no, because then that would be a violation of your boundaries. See? So what is the missing ingredient here? The missing ingredient in all this is communication. It's just plain rude to dismiss your neighbor without considering her feelings, especially given that she was doing something nice for you and not asking for anything in return. But the reality is the neighbor deserves something in return. You're concerned for their feelings. But Dr. G, does this mean that they can ask anything of me? Of course not. Your feelings matter too. But you can see how challenging this is. And getting into this all or nothing, it's thinking process just makes this 10 times worse. But the problem is, of course, most people seem to think that way. And our culture encourages it. We've got endless all or nothing, political discussion going on these days. There's no end to it. But we can't do this. Now, my point here for this video really is that you just can't spew boundaries and expect to get whatever you want with this. It doesn't work. But you shouldn't ignore them and let people walk all over you either. You've got to find a balance here. And the issue is that you just can't get out of the game of communicating your wants and your feelings and your needs to someone else in important social contacts. But just know that communication is two-way. You get to say how you feel and what you want, but so do they. Now, why is this so challenging these days? I think this is so confusing because nowadays the sorts of culturally constructed norms that have existed for a long time have really kind of fallen apart and fallen by the wayside in the last few decades. Whether that's a good thing or not is a subject for another day. My point is merely that there is a trade-off for when you do that. Traditional societies have a lot of this more or less sorted out. That is to say that everyone knows more or less what a reasonable request is and what an unreasonable request is, and what an expected reciprocation would be in the big gray area in between there. Now, that's what those rules are for. But our society, of course, everybody hates rules, and they're too restrictive, and they're too arbitrary, and they're too blah, blah, blah. You get the idea. This is fine, so long as everyone realizes that throwing out the rules does not get us out of the game. It just means everyone has to reinvent the wheel with every new social contact and every new social interaction. So I mentioned that timeless tales that tell us a lot about this kind of stuff. And the example that came to mind when I was putting this together was Rumple Stillskin. Now, I've talked about that folktale elsewhere. There's a whole lot going on in that story, but in this one, you can see it's got something to say about boundaries. It's a great example of this problem. And like all folktales, it's wrapped up into this unforgettable and colorful story that children can understand. And that's why they're so brilliant and they're such a gold mine. At the beginning of the story, the protagonist is already someone who is being asked to do way too much. The daughter of the villager, whatever version of the story you're looking at, tells the king that she can spin straw into gold, which is, of course, impossible. And this puts her in an unenviable position of trying to do this thing anyway. So she basically turns to the magical character Rumple Stillskin, and the Western European version of it, to do it for her. But she's really just acquiescing one boundary violation from her father and then hence from the king and trading in it for an even worse one from Rumpelstiltskin. And it isn't until she says no to giving up her firstborn child, which is a completely ridiculous request, that she ultimately succeeds and wins the day by finally guessing Rumple's full name. Now, there's a whole lot that goes into that whole name guessing business that we don't need to get into here. And there's a whole lot of other stuff going on. But for today's purposes, I just wanted to kind of point out that the moral of this story, which is never explicitly stated but just shown, is that when we let people walk all over us, it continues to escalate, and the demands will just compile on and on and on until they become ridiculous. But the folktale is really concise too in the way that it shows the other side of this exchange. When we can continually demand more and more and more, like the king does or Rumpelstiltskin does, and give no thought to the person that we're demanding so much from, and not caring about their needs, well, we end up empty-handed. And in Rumpelstiltskin's case, he winds up getting tossed out a window. So that's my spiel about boundaries. Hopefully that helps to clarify some things and maybe help you deal with some challenging interpersonal conflicts out there. I've got more book signings coming up soon. The next one will be in Louisville, Kentucky on the 12th of July. So I'm going to be talking more about that and sharing my observations and thoughts like I did last time. And then I'm going to have a couple more in the works as well after that. And I'll keep you guys posted. It's all about my signing King of the Forgotten Darkness, book 1 of The Raven's Tale. And hopefully you guys will check that out. Links in the description below. If you like this stuff, subscribe, like, blah, blah, blah. You know what to do. And I'll see you next time.